Today, we're talking about one of the things that can really foul up a real estate transaction, but we want you to be prepared on it. We're talking about contents, fixtures, and furniture and how they relate to the contract or sale, how you need to be organized and prepared and have the best transaction. So let's get after it. We are talking today about one of the most common aspects of a real estate transaction here in the Low Country, but probably one of the things that's least discussed until the last minute. We want to get right on top of it. It has to do with contents, furniture, fixtures, things that may or may not be included in a real estate transaction. It's not really the real estate, but in a lot of cases, it's tied to it. So we want to talk about the seller side and the buyer side on this. And, in the Low Country, we're dealing with a lot of properties that are sold fully furnished. These are rental properties, second home. That's pretty straightforward. And in some cases, we're dealing with someone's primary residence where the last thing they're thinking about is selling all their furniture. So it's kind of a mixed bag in between. And what we're finding is that this conversation, let's start with sellers. All right. So critically important to be thinking about, is there anything or everything that you want included in the sale of the home? Should you price your house furnished, unfurnished? And how do you go about doing that? So let's go right after it on the seller side to begin with. Let's talk about, let's take a furnished property. It's a villa or rental property, that sort of thing. The sense of that is everything's included. And one reason it should all be included is because a property like that, if it's actually a rental property, the future bookings of the rentals are predicated upon all that stuff staying with the property. So in a lot of cases, you have to come from a pricing perspective, you're pricing a property like that furnished, right? Like what does that look like?
I think it's really important to understand what the market is doing in that situation. If you're dealing with pricing a rental property that has booked rentals, right? Those rentals need to continue, as you've said. So, sure. And typically in a villa complex or something like that, your other properties that you're gauging price off of, they were all sold furnished, right. Typically. But you have to understand how a buyer interprets that, because if it's a property that doesn't necessarily carry an expectation to be sold furnished, sure. And your buyer doesn't want the furniture, but you've priced it including the furniture, you don't want your buyer coming back saying, hey, I don't want the furniture, so let's discount the price some. So you've got to take that into consideration. But in the rental world, I think you do have to price it as a turnkey investment.
Okay, so in some ways, even though we're not selling the business, we're selling the product of the business, which is the real estate, the contents, everything in the kitchen cabinets, the spoons, the forks, the knives, sometimes all the way down to, beach toys and bikes and all that sort of thing are typically going to all be included except what we call a not included in sale list. So when we're talking with sellers, we're saying, okay, now just to be clear, you're selling it furnished. Let's get super granular. What's a not included in sale list mean? And what do you typically see as an example of that?
A not included in sale list is just that, but it is very important to be specific and to be written down and to be presented to the buyer audience in advance of getting the offer. A lot of times you may have a not included in sale list. Maybe there's an heirloom piece of furniture or a piece of artwork or something like that you really want. Please label that, take a picture of it, whatever you can do, or remove it from the property in advance. Sure. Just get it out of sight, out of mind, because sometimes your buyer might come and say, even though that's on the not included in sale list, that's a make or break for me. I want that piece of furniture. I want that piece of art. So you've got to be thinking about this in advance.
That's a seller tip, right? So if you've got, let's just talk about that heirloom piece or that Tiffany chandelier that's like, no matter what, I'm not selling the house in any way if somebody wants that. Sometimes there's a concept of swapping that out, right? So you'll have that. And other items that maybe it's not that convenient to, you're just creating a list of these things are specifically not included. Everything in the locked owner's closet is not included. Right. Those electric bikes that we love when we come to the island, those are not included. That special piece of art on the wall that our daughter painted, that's not included. Those are pretty traditional and acceptable kind of terms. And we're encouraging sellers to think about that up front, get it in writing, and anytime we're getting an offer, the buyer is acknowledging that so that hopefully it's not being negotiated.
Yeah,
right?
and there's a lot, we work with a lot of sellers that aren't here a lot. They have an investment property here, they're not here. The best time to put that not included in sale list together is when you're actually at the property. So if you're a seller and you come into town, you're going to spend a week or something like that, you know you're going to be selling in the next couple years, just go ahead and start writing things down and have a game plan for that so you're not forced to do that at the last second.
So genius, because we have seen situations where a seller says, that's everything I can think of. Then they come in town the week before closing and say, oh my gosh, I forgot about that ceramic turtle or whatever it is. So a lot of times what we're finding is that our agents are talking to the seller, maybe even doing a Zoom meeting in the property saying, let's scan each room, just make sure we didn't forget about anything. Okay, those are great tips. Let's talk about included in sale. So we're going to kind of flip that. Unfurnished properties. Let's say it's somebody's primary residence and you're not going to sell it furnished, obviously, but you've got certain things that you really want to be included. Let's start with the traditional in our market, appliances.
Okay.
Pretty much everything is included typically in appliances, including refrigerator, washer, and dryer. I know y'all may be looking from different markets. It's common to move those things around down here. They pretty much stay put. Let's talk about flat screen mounted TVs. What's the best tip on that?
That's a great one. We run into this all the time. Again, we're dealing with a situation where a seller is selling, but they're not selling it furnished. However, they've got a big flat screen TV mounted on the wall or in the bedrooms or something like that. Maybe they picked it up last year. It's their favorite TV. Our recommendation has tended to be, hey, just leave it. Make it included. Don't remove it, pack it, try to transport this big flat screen TV that you don't have the box for anymore. Then you're patching the holes, you're trying to match the paint. It becomes a nightmare when we all know you can go to Sam's Club now and get the next generation TV for under
a lot less. Right, a lot less.
It's so affordable, and you can have that custom for your new house.
And it adds value to the buyer,
it
right?
Does.
So those are sort of becoming appliances. What about other appliances? Like if you're moving out of the area and you don't need that grill, that really custom gas grill that fits perfectly on the back deck, sometimes it can be helpful to just say, that's included.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's not just because it contributes to the property, but maybe it contributes to your experience moving as a seller. Maybe it's a big dresser in one of the rooms that you would have to hire people to come and take it apart and move it and all of this stuff. If you don't specify that it's included, the expectation of the buyer is everything's out.
Right.
Attic contents. We've even had situations where we've had sellers that maybe this is their final move and they've got a lot of contents in the house and it's overwhelming and they don't have the resources or the energy maybe to get everything out. Well, we've talked about, hey, how about we just do this? Let's present it as a lot of included items and let the buyer pick and choose. The buyer can get out what they want to. It takes the burden off of you. But if it's not written down in advance and not agreed to in advance, you run into problems on both sides of it.
Yeah, so that speaks to maybe two pieces there, just to split that apart. One is included in sale. I really want these things to be included. We're never going to use that pool table. We really wanted to go with the house. We're not asking anything extra. We just want it to be included. Or maybe the pool furniture. The next house we have doesn't have a pool. You all can have all the pool furniture. We would love for it to stay right there. The other is maybe, as you mentioned, someone who's downsizing. We're talking about things that they maybe would be willing to sell. They don't want to include it. They don't want to force it on a buyer.
Yes.
But they want to say, listen, these are items that we're pretty much not going to take with us. How does a seller handle that? And then how does a buyer respond to that list? And how does that come together?
It's a great opportunity for both parties. And it's also strategic when it comes to pricing and how you move the real estate. Make the furniture negotiable. And a little comment in the listing that says furnishings or some furnishings negotiable. So what does that say? That tells a buyer that, hey, they could do a little shopping when they're looking around. If there's some big pieces of furniture that they like, or maybe they're coming in as a second home and they don't want to immediately have to furnish it, they know the seller is willing to maybe negotiate some of those items. Then what happens is that translates into a separate contract or a bill of sale that the buyer and seller can come to terms on in addition to the contract of sale on the real estate.
Right.
And it can be specific about the items and the expectations of both parties. And that bill of sale is tied to the contract of sale so that if the contract of sale falls apart, they're not selling the furniture by itself.
It's hugely important.
It needs to be tied together, but separate.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the buyer and the seller have to figure out what these things are worth, right? So as we might say to a seller, well, listen, if you don't need the dining room set, you don't need that bedroom suite, you don't want the piano or whatever, what are these things going to be worth to you? And they sometimes will come to us and say, well, what do you think? And I'm thinking, well, I'm not really as good at selling furniture as I am at selling real estate, and especially in terms of valuation. So you might have to do some research on that, et cetera. But you come up with a list and it initiates, like you said, you put in the listing, say, hey, some furniture may be negotiable. Contact us. We'll get you a list. Here's the list of things. And a lot of times what we encourage is don't muddy the waters of the real estate deal with the furniture deal.
Right.
Get the real estate sold and then promise to have a conversation about the contents that might be negotiable a little bit separately, right? It's being done around the same time, but don't let one muddy the water with the other. And what we say is, boy, if you're interested in selling those items, whatever that is, there's no better buyer than the buyer of your house because they're excited about it. You don't have to move it. They don't have to go procure it. You just change some money at closing and you're good to go.
Right. And something that folks don't think about, but it ends up happening a lot, especially in villa sales and things like that. I mean, used furniture is not all that valuable anymore.
Right.
It just isn't.
Yeah.
Even really expensive old antique pieces, sometimes they don't have a lot of value on the resale secondary market or anything like that. I mean, auction companies will take them and things like that, and you might get a small check, but they really don't have a significant amount of value, but there's a ton of convenience value.
Sure.
So a lot of times we see the bill of sale for $1,
right,
or $0 or $10. It just says furniture is being left behind at the mutual convenience of both the buyer and seller at no value.
Well, and value is hugely important too. Think about it, and all in your time and experience in the appraisal world before Collins Group, where does furniture contents, because typically like a lender or an appraiser, they're not really talking about selling or buying or figuring out financing on contents.
They're not.
So what's the tip or trick around that?
Well, there's no trick around it. It just is what it is. If you are a bank and you're lending money on a piece of property, you don't want to lend money on a sofa. Right. The sofa can easily go into a moving van and get out of there.
Sure.
So the bank wants to focus on the value of the property, nothing else, no personal property, anything like that. The appraiser is going to translate that into the appraisal, and the appraiser, if they use, let's say they use a comp that sold fully furnished and the furniture was included in the bill of sale, that appraiser is going to try and understand, was it just some resale stuff? Was it really expensive furniture? How much did that furniture contribute to that sale?
Sure.
And they will extract that off of the sale price of the comp to try to extract the value of that comp to use to value the piece of property. So an appraiser, if you sold a property that's fully furnished for, let's just call it $100,000,
right,
and the appraiser felt like the contributory value of the furniture was $20,000, that appraisal might come in at 80.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it. So you've got to be careful about the valuation, and sometimes we do see that. I love your commentary about, this furniture has zero value being relayed at the convenience of both parties. And when appraisers see that, do they sort of believe that? Do they understand that? They understand, okay, that's what the parties agreed to, and so I'm going to abide by that?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
They're going to do their homework. Yeah. I mean, you got to be upfront. I mean, this is a very important transaction. And like you said, you don't want the furniture situation to muddy up the waters of this. If the furniture conveys value, set a value. Let the buyer and seller come to terms at a value and price it accordingly. That's going to do a couple things too. I mean, if you take the value of the furniture out, the buyer is not going to be paying tax
Right.
on that furniture because of the real estate tax is going to go higher if that's included.
You mentioned that. I think we had a really high-end sale, and the parties agreed that they were going to attribute a fair but pretty sizable. They went the other direction.
Like
they didn't say
$500,000, right?
It was. They basically said, "Listen, we're gonna attribute a fair, appropriate, but significant amount of money on the bill of sale, and we're going to reduce the sales price," which ended up reducing some of the other tax implications and cost and fees associated with the transaction on both sides of the transaction.
Sure.
So super smart. Well, it's just like we said, it's one of those things that if you're not on top of it and it's a last minute issue, it can sometimes be too late. And people get touchy about things. They get touchy about like, well, wait a minute, I was expecting everything to be included. Or a seller saying, I never intended for that to be included. So you can see the need to get ahead of it in an organized fashion in writing so that everybody's on the same page and we can reduce the chance of emotions messing up the deal.
Emotions. And I think it's really important. These conversations about furniture and personal belongings, they're very fluid, friendly conversations typically as you're negotiating the contract and as you're coming to terms.
Sure.
Oh yeah, we'll give you that. Oh, I'd love this. Oh, we don't have to take that. I mean, you get that kind of banter back and forth. Once you have the contract of sale and it's signed and sealed and all of that, and you're trucking towards closing, little things like a seller going, oh, I forgot about the painting in the bedroom that my mom gave me. The buyer's like, no, that's ours now.
Yeah. And now you're here.
Yeah. So you want to avoid that, and you can avoid that by preparation and documentation.
Yeah. So smart. Getting after it early on, being prepared, like we always propose. Smooth out these bumps in the road way early on and have a nice, smooth transaction. All right, guys, there we go. Something really to be thinking about on the buyer side and the seller side. We hope it's been helpful for you today.